to order. Show that all board members are present except for Ms. Sixberry. She'll be here pretty soon.
And she
then
just walked in.
Oh, there you are. We're all here. Okay. Angie, you can start.
All right, thank you, Tanya, School Board Chair. And yeah, so tonight, I'm going to present some information on both our budget for for this year, excuse me, and for our property tax levy, proposed property tax levy for next year. And so with that, I'll just dig right into it. And just first, I'll start out talking about the Minnesota state law requirements. This information must be presented at a public meeting, and then between the dates, as you can see it up there on the PowerPoint. And we must present information on the current year budget, and so the fiscal year that we're in is 25-26, as well as the proposed property tax levy for next year. And so our agenda, keep going. So our agenda tonight, I'm going to start out by talking about some background on school funding, and then the district's budget, and then I'll talk about our proposed levy, and then we must allow time for public comments at the end of the hearing. So we'll do that at the end. So with that, we'll just start out by basically how our property tax is calculated and the background on it. And essentially, the Minnesota Constitution sets the funding for Minnesota public schools. Basically, the Constitution determines the tax levy for Minnesota school districts. And next slide, please. And then, as a result of this, because the Constitution sets the funding is highly regulated. The state sets the formulas, which determine a district's revenue. The state sets tax policy. The state sets the maximum authorized property tax levy. And also, most important, districts can levy less, but not more than the amount authorized by the state or Minnesota statute. And then the state does authorize school boards to submit referendums for operating and capital needs to voters for approval. And as many of you know, we did that last November, and unfortunately, we were not successful. But the state does allow that authority to ask the taxpayers for additional revenue. And so I'll continue with just background on funding and want to talk a little bit about the general education formula allowance. The general education formula allowance, and I always say, the school board probably hears me say this many times, it's the district's bread and butter. It's the main revenue source of the district, and it has lagged inflation basically for many, many years. And you can see that graphically on the slide. And so if the formula had kept up with inflation over the years, for 25-26, the formula allowance would need to increase by another $1,420, or another 19%, because it has not kept pace with inflation since 2002-2003. And another major revenue source for school districts, keep going, is special education. And you've probably heard me talk about this quite a bit, about the underfunding of special education and special education cross-subsidy. It has gotten better, especially for Big Lake. It has gotten better, but it is not fully funded. And I just wanted to mention to the group and to the members of the public here that are listening, is that just want to remind you, there is a Blue Ribbon Commission on Special Education that must find $250 million in savings, or the cross-subsidy will be cut in future years. And that deadline is October 1st of 2026. So basically what I'm saying there is that the underfunding of special education could get worse. We don't know for sure, but it could. It could get worse. And school district's budget, and we'll kind of segue into about, kind of background on the school district's budget. It's divided into separate funds based on the purposes of the revenue. The general fund is the main operations fund of the district. Food service accounts for basically our food service program. And then we have community service, construction fund, debt service, and an OPEB trust. Mainly going to talk about the general fund, because the general fund is, as I said, the main operating fund of the district. And one of the things we are required to present is basically our budget for the current year. So this graph here was published in the Patriot newspaper in November. We are required by law to do that. And then a revised budget was approved by the school board at its November school board meeting, and that revised budget was incorporated into this information that was published in the paper. And just one comment I want to make about this is, and the school board hears me talk about this a lot, but we are deficit spending in the general fund, both in reserved and assigned fund balances, because of the timing of some projects. But the big fund balance we look at is our unassigned or fund balance available for operations, and we are deficit spending in that fund as well. And with that, I've got some graphs just to show you, kind of give you a perspective, again, more on the district's budget. So the general fund, as I mentioned, that's the main operation fund of the districts. That's the biggest piece of the pie. That's the blue pie chart there, as you can see. And then if we dig into deeper on the component, keep going, dig into the components of the revenue, basically it's divided into state sources, federal sources, local sources, and the local includes a local property tax levy, and then a small category of other. And I just want to point out here, again, the biggest piece of the pie is the state. We are highly dependent on the state for a district's revenues. And as I mentioned, property taxes are under local revenue there, and that's the second biggest piece of the pie. And with that, we'll talk about expenditures. And this graph, I like to say this is how the monies are spent in the district. So salaries and wages and benefits, I think that's self-explanatory. Purchase services, the biggest piece in purchase services is transportation, because we contract out our transportation. And then supplies and materials, capital expenditures, and then a small amount for other. The biggest, because we're a school district and we provide services to our students, of course, the biggest component is salaries and benefits, and those two pieces of the pie equal 74.6%, or just under 75%. And then the next slide then shows it by program, like what programs are we spending this money on. And I want to just point out, so if you take the pieces of the pie that are regular instruction, vocational ed instruction is like our CTE or career and tech ed classes, as well as Wright Technical Center, special ed instruction, instructional support, pupil support. If you add all those pieces of the pie, that's 80.5% of the total expenditures. And then I just wanted to point out the administrative component is only 3.2%. That would include like principals and the superintendent and their support staff, and the district support, which is 3.7%. That includes, like myself, finance, human resources, our MARS or our student accounting, payroll, and communications. So just want to kind of give you an idea of what is included in these numbers. Okay, so we've talked about the budget, and now let's segue into how does this impact the tax levy. And for school district, the changes in a tax levy does not, I want to emphasize, does not determine the change in the budget, because for school districts, the tax levy is based on state-determined formulas. Some increases in the tax levy are revenue neutral, offset by reductions in state aid. And then the last piece on that graph there, I want to really emphasize this: an increase in school taxes does not automatically correlate to an increase in our budget. And I'm going to use the example of what you've heard me talk about called equalization. And so the formula, that like there might be a formula that there's an amount per pupil unit, but then there's a state share, which is state aid, and a local share, which is property taxes. And if the state doesn't change the formulas, it's called the equalization factor. What happens is that equalization aid gets eroded as market values or assessed values increase, and therefore more of the burden is on local taxpayers versus the state. And we have seen a lot of that. The school board has heard me talk about that over the last several years. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit also about a school district versus a city and a county. So, like I said, like in a city and a county, their property tax levy is a big factor in determining their next year's budget, and that's not the case for school districts. Our budget year begins July 1st. The levy that we're proposing tonight is revenue for the 26-27 fiscal year, and that budget is not adopted by the school board until June, so June of next year, June of 2026. And like I said, the city and the county, their budget year, their calendar year, January 1st, and the taxes does provide revenue for their next year's or calendar year budget. This next slide is, this is a sample that everyone should be receiving from their county. I call this the Truth in Taxation Notice. And so what I wanted to mention here is that this notice, it's not only schools, so it includes your county, includes your school district, and then depending on if you're in a city or in a township. So like there's the three components included on this notice. And so then with that, I'm going to go back to the school district property taxes. And I've kind of already mentioned the state calculates the levy amounts for various categories. And so there are the two main categories are voter approved levies, which we require voter approval, and levies allowed by state law. And that's where I was mentioning that it's in statute, it may be equalized, it may not be equalized. And so again, just talking about the property tax process, I'm not gonna go over each step, but I just wanna mention that this is almost a year-long process. And it starts with where the city or the county assessor determines the estimated market value of each parcel of property. I want to really emphasize the school district has no control over that, no control at all, but it does impact your taxes. Step 5 is where the school board, and that's where we're at tonight, is where the school board sets the levy, and then that's just one step in the process. I'll just briefly, so they set the market value, the legislature sets the formulas, the county auditor calculates the tax capacity, MDE calculates the levy limits, and then that's where we're at tonight, like I said, where the school board will set the levy tonight. And this slide gives you just the dates in that process. So in September, the MDE distributes a first draft of what's called a levy limit that I receive and I review with a fine-tooth comb. These, they're like 25, 26 pages long, but I'm just making sure everything's correct. On September 24th, the school board did approve the proposed levy, and then that levy is what you would have seen in your truth and taxation statements. And then so I got ahead of myself. In mid-November, you get those statements, the proposed property tax statements. And then tonight, we're having the public hearing, and then following the hearing tonight is when the school board will certify the final levy amount. Okay, now we'll get into, I get more details on the actual levy itself. The proposed 2026 levy is an increase from 2025 of 4.6%. And what I want to emphasize to the members of the public and with the school board, this scenario keeps the district's tax rate constant, or in other words, consistent with prior years, which has been a school board goal philosophy for the last, I think ever since I've been here, to be honest with you, that they want to just keep that tax, because and how I explain it is we don't want big fluctuation in taxes. We don't want it to go up one year and then it goes way down, then it goes up. We kind of keep that tax rate constant. And so on the next slide, this just in a chart shows you, and you see at the bottom right, the total is the 4.6. I'm going to talk more about each component. But again, the categories are your general fund, the main operating fund of the district, community service fund, the debt service, and you hear me say debt service, that's the district's mortgage payments. And then again, you have just a summary, and then a summary of voter approved and other. And with that, There's two main areas where the levy is increasing that we'll talk about. The first one is in the general fund, and this is what's called our LTFM, or Long-Term Facilities Maintenance Levy. It's increasing by a little over 1.2 million. The use of these funds are for health and safety, deferred maintenance, and most importantly, roofing projects. And so in this proposed levy, this includes dollars to do a roofing project in 2026, 2027. And this was a recent legislative change just this past year, which allows school districts this levy authority. The next change, this is actually a decrease. And this is where it's called debt service excess. And because school districts are required to levy at least 5% in excess of what I say are mortgage payments, sometimes there's like a debt excess because our delinquent tax rates are not at 5%. Like, for example, now I think they're at like 0.5%. And so there's an excess, but because the state regulates that balance, we're not allowed to keep that, except for specific purposes. And one purpose where you can retain that debt excess is if you are looking at a future project and then you use that debt excess to what I call buy down that project and then decrease a levy for that future project. And that is, that is a little over $505,000 decrease. And so then I got some examples then just kind of explaining how, like, the changes in the value of a property, how it impacts. And I have, if you can go on to the next slide, I'll explain how the property value comes into play. So in our example, we have two houses, the orange and the blue, and both houses are valued at $100,000, and then each property will pay $250 of tax levy in this example. So then if you change the value, so then in this scenario, the orange house value increases by 10%, but the blue house's value increases by 25%. So you can see it goes from 100 to 110, and then the blue one, 100 to 125. Well, what happens is that the blue house is going to pay more in taxes and property taxes, not just for the school, but for all taxing entities because their value has increased. And I just want to emphasize again, the school district does not have any control over that. And but this is some of the reasons too why your property taxes may increase. The next few slides are I have some charts that show, it's a chart that shows, one chart will show, not quite yet, thanks, John. It'll show like with no valuation increase. So in other words, your property value stays the same, and it shows what school district taxes has done over those 4 years. And then the second chart will show with values that have increased, and I have in there 9.2% over the past 4 years, which is indicative of what actual property value increases have been over the last 4 years. So with that, then go ahead, John. What I want to show here, so this chart is based on no changes in property value. So you can see so the estimated market value is on the far left, taxes payable in 23, 24, and 25, and then you have proposed for 2026. And I'm specifically zeroing in on a residential homestead around that $350,000, $400,000 line. The changes in taxes with no increase in values is, if I can see that correctly, like a negative dollar. Now, so where the cursor is at there, that's over the 4 years. It's actually gone down, and then from 25 to 26, it's a negative $1. Then if you go on to the next slide, it shows this graphically again. I want to emphasize no changes in value. And as you can see on the left, I mean, they have gone down. Now the next chart, this is, this is example of commercial and apartments. We'll keep going. So then this one is based on a 9.2% cumulative change over the last 4 years, again, which is indicative of what actually has happened. And again, I want to emphasize again, the school district does not have any control over that. So you can see for, our examples here is a $350,000 and a $400,000 property. And you can see that they have gone, the taxes have gone up slightly. And a lot of that is because the values have increased. And then I think the next, oh, okay, yes. So then I'm going to conclude the presentation by just making you aware of there is some property tax relief that a taxpayer can seek out. There's something called a homestead credit refund, a special property tax refund, and a senior citizen property tax deferral. Deferral. If you think you may qualify for this, I'm going to recommend that you consult with your tax advisor. But there are options that you possibly could get some property tax relief. So the next steps is we'll allow time for public comment, and then at the conclusion of the hearing, then the board will certify the 2026 property tax levy. And with that, I would like to open it up to the floor and ask if anyone has any questions.
Will all of this be on the website so we can take a look at this more in depth?
Yeah. We will usually put that up.
Yeah, it's currently up under school board. So
Oh, yes, thank you.
If you go to About on our top left and you go to school board, then it'll have like meeting minutes and agenda, and then it's right on there for truth and taxation.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
But yes, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
Questions, but I'll defer to anybody else that wants to go first. I just have a few. What was the rate of inflation set by the state from 2025 to 2026?
Good question. 2.75, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yep.
Thank you. And then, does the technology levy have an inflation factor? I don't remember. It's
based off, so it's calculated based on what's called net task capacity. And so how that correlates is, for example, if assessed values, or like I was saying, the market value of the homes, if that is increasing, because it's a rate on that amount, okay? So as that amount increases, but if it decreases, it goes the other way. The revenue actually decreases.
And just, you talk about increased taxable market value. My home went up less than 0.1%.
Okay.
So that's not really a factor.
Right, uh-huh.
Taxes.
Yep.
School district has two types of levies, voter-approved levies
Mm-hmm.
and other local levies. The operating levy, beginning in 2026, did that move from voter-approved levy to other local levy?
Well, we didn't pass the one. Are you talking?
I'm talking about the school board renewed levy.
Oh, that's a good question.
That was approved by the.
I believe that's under voter. That's a very good question. Yeah, I think the state kept it under voter approved, because it initially would have been voter approved.
Yeah, initially, but
Yeah.
okay. When does the 2021 Restore and Renew bond referendum taxes end?
That was a 20-year bond. If I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure it was a 20-year bond, yes.
But the state now also approves something called the roofing project?
Yes.
So you're not gonna take money from the Renew and Restore, you're gonna, it's separate.
So I don't know, TJ, if you want to talk about, yeah, go ahead.
Renew and Restore, we did do roofing. We did about, I think it was about I'd have to look, about $6 million worth
Yeah.
of roofing. But the state legislature did make a change in long-term facilities maintenance to allow for board-approved roofing projects through pay-as-you-go or bonding type projects through long-term facilities. Because of the high need of deferred maintenance throughout the state.
And I can give a little history on that too, and the reasons why the state did approve that. Oh, okay, okay.
Just curious, I mean, how many roofing projects are we talking? One school, two schools, or?
So the one that is on the board agenda for this evening, there's actually 3 schools that have sections of roofing left that will be replaced. And once those are done, the district is 100% caught up, complete. Every single roof will have a warranty, be covered under the manufacturer's warranty for 30
Because I
years.
know that there was damage done to the roofs in the schools and insurance paid for.
That was, that was hail damage.
That was the hail damage, yep, from
Those
20.
were on roofs that had recently been replaced, so some of them were replaced and then replaced about a year and a half later due to the hail damage,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately.
Now, maybe I'm wrong on how this works. The information published by the school district regarding the referendums just this last November,
Mm-hmm.
a month ago, month and a half ago, it said that there were expiring levies that would offset the increase in operating funds that you were looking for. Now that, I'm sure it said for taxes payable in 2026. And if you owned a $400,000 home, which you can tell by looking at me, I don't have anything close to that. But I thought, since they didn't pass, my taxes, I have my proposed tax sheet here, would go down some because of that. Because it didn't pass, my school district, when I say taxes, I'm
Mhm.
talking school district, mine actually went up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so, yep, I can speak to that, and then maybe I'll have just Stephanie, you pipe in if I'm missing something here. So one of the things we had communicated in our referendum campaign is that if the bond referendum didn't pass, we had other projects that would need to be done. And one of them is roofing projects. Another one is the track. Our track needs to be repaired. So if the bond referendum, if the bond referendum had passed, we were not going to do these roofing projects. Okay, does that make sense? Because we didn't want to hit the taxpayers with a, horrendous tax increase. So we would have deferred those into future years. Okay, so, but because the bond referendum didn't pass, then we decided that to keep the tax, because like I said, it's been a board, I don't know if goal is the right word, philosophy, to keep a tax rate constant. So to keep that tax rate constant is then we are able to finish off the roofing projects that TJ just referred to. Am I missing anything? I'm looking at my partners here that the communications we did, or, yeah, yeah. Right.
Yeah, because I was expecting that taxes would go down.
Yeah, and then, yeah, but we had communicated that even if it didn't pass, we had other projects that we needed to do. And again, roofing and the track were two that we had communicated about.
And where did that money go?
Say that again?
You might want to touch on the difference of had it passed as a bond versus having a levy. Do you know what I'm saying? There's a difference.
Let me ask, I'll just
Oh.
come right out and ask.
Okay.
Are we talking lease levy authority?
Okay, so two part. Roofing projects is LTFM authority,
Yep.
and I talked about that. A track would be a lease levy authority, correct?
And did the school district get lease levy authority?
We have not done anything with that yet because we need to complete the roofing projects first.
Okay, so there is no, that has not.
Right now, there is not, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
I know you can't discuss current contract negotiations with your employees. I know you.
No, we can't.
Okay. But settled contracts,
Mm-hmm.
When was last time a contract was settled?
That would have been, yeah, SEIU, yeah. Was it last fall? Or January?
It was last,
Would have been last January, correct?
January for last year and then this year.
Yeah, so it was for 24, 25 and 25, 26.
Yeah, that, usually they're 2 years. And
Mm-hmm.
any idea what those increases or decreases were?
I don't have the percent. Do you know off the top of your head? We have our HR manager here.
They were increases though, I'm assuming.
Yeah, yeah. Like what would we have put on the matrix?
And
I want to say,
All right,
yeah, I
I
don't
guess
remember.
that's pretty much it. There's a couple of more here, but they're not that important, but I mean.
Well, I can't say, Tim, you know how to get hold of us. We'll gladly
Yeah,
sit down with you.
And
yeah.
I appreciate
Of
that.
course, of course, of course.
Thank you. But yeah, I was concerned that maybe the reason my taxes didn't go down was lease levy authority and,
The
so
the tax statement you have, it would be, that's the roofing project, so that's the LTFM authority.
and that's good to know. So I'm
Yeah.
glad I came to the meeting so I can find that out.
Yeah.
And, wonderful. We're lucky to have you because I couldn't handle all the numbers and all that stuff. And again, I told the school board, I do appreciate you. I question money sometimes, but that's because I don't have any. But anyway, but I appreciate your time and dedication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like Mr. Trubenbach said, you can always reach out to either one of us, and we'd be happy to help answer your questions.
Thank you very much.
All right, is there any other questions, comments? Hearing none? Go ahead.
Oh, are you done?
Yep, I'm
Okay.
done, so.
Then I will adjourn this meeting.